In his earlier days, we know that Joseph was not very popular with his brethren. He was the older of the two sons of Rachel, and he was a special favorite of his father Jacob. Many facts have entered into it. Jacob had loved Rachel dearly, and undoubtedly Joseph reminded him richly of her. Then, too, he probably saw in Joseph's sensitive spirit something of his own nature. And like so many fathers, he wanted this favorite son of his to have a better life than the life that he had had. The coat of many colors was a symbol of that. So there arose a jealousy on the part of the brothers. What is more, he was a different caliber of person. The brothers were practical, plodding types of people. The kind of people that were quite satisfied to take life on the plateau on which they found it and to plod their way through it. The dull routine of life was something to be expected, and it was evidently something that the brothers accepted. Joseph, on the other hand, was a very imaginative sort of person. He was the kind of person who was constantly saying things and evidently doing things that was shaking the complacency of the brethren, always seeing something beyond the horizon. So they were angry, so they were jealous. And when he went to Dothan to find them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, "Behold, this dreamer cometh." I'm not preaching this sermon this morning specifically on Joseph, but on the great dreamers of the world, the way out men, if you will, the Calebs of history. The men who were not satisfied with the well-cultivated and the fertile valleys of life, but who saw in the mountains something to be conquered, and that they believed within themselves was the power by which it might be conquered. There is the story, as we know it, of a young lad who on one cold evening sat in his mother's kitchen watching the moths play against the lamplight and listening to the singing of the kettle of water that was on the stove. He was a weakly boy. He was hollow-chested. He was sallow-cheeked. And he had great sunken eyes. But as it boiled, it seemed to him as though there was some force within that kettle that was trying to get out. And it was from this, of course, that James Watt captivated the power of steam. When he told his friends that one day the inspiration that came from that kettle lid was something that would drive steamships across oceans and would drive railroad trains across continents, they must have said, "Behold this dreamer." So it has been through all the centuries, even to our own day, and probably even in our own day more than ever before. The only difference today is that we're so accustomed to the miracles that we don't marvel at them quite so much. But the works are still beyond comprehension. The works of these dreamers, the works of these way-out men. Consider, for instance, in the field of computers. In less than 15 years, operating speeds will be measured in terms of nanoseconds, and a nanosecond is to a second as a second is to 30 years. Think of it. David Sarnoff speaks of it as a sliver of time so thin that it is beyond mental grasp. And he goes on to say that these computers will respond to handwriting. They will respond to the spoken word. They will recognize a voice, recognize a face in 10,000. They will be able to learn from experience, which of course is one place where they're going to surpass human beings. In the school of tomorrow, computerized teaching machine will handle all the routine aspects, directing the student in his subject and helping him to correct his answers. It won't be very long either before in this electronic future it will be possible to maintain a complete medical file of every person in the community and every person in the nation. In balloting, it won't be necessary for us to get up on a rainy day and find our ways to the polls. The balloting can be done right from our home. And instead of people going around and ringing doorbells and trying to get some kind of opinion poll on a possible presidential candidate or on some public issue, it will be possible for them just to throw in a couple of switches and they can get this poll in a matter of minutes. But Mr. Sarnoff concluded the article that he was writing in this matter with a very significant observation. He said, among other things, we must remain aware of the limitation of the computer as an aid to our leaders in the decision-making process. There are basic human judgments beyond the competence of any mechanized register, moral imperatives beyond arithmetic, and he quoted one of the most brilliant exponents of the computer science, the late Dr. Norbert Wiener, when he said the machine's danger is not from the machine, but from the man who makes it. Well, what are we going to do about him? Surely it's not a matter of declaring a moratorium on science. There's no use trying to stop scientific research. We couldn't if we would. There was a time when we looked upon the earth, or man looked upon the earth, as the center of the universe and everything else was revolving about it. And there were great punishment for those who dared to proclaim otherwise. But there always seems to be some Copernicus. There always seems to be someone who will not be silenced, and thank God for it, and progress goes on. No, the future is not in trying to silence the way out men in science and in medicine and in other fields, but somehow or other, we've got to, for our very survival, produce a few more way out men in the field of religion and morals. Somehow or other, we've got to produce some men of the caliber of the prophets of the Old Testament that would be as far ahead of our day, morally and spiritually, as an Isaiah and a Jeremiah was in his day. It's not going to be an easy matter, because in a time when there would appear to be such an abundance of scientific dreamers and visionaries, we're going through a great scarcity of dreamers in the realm of religion. This is Reformation Sunday. But it's a tragic thing if we look upon Reformation Sunday just as another occasion for a pep rally for Protestants. There's much too serious going on in the world for that. And I'm not thinking of it in terms of one man who gathered around him a great group of men who brought about a division in the church of his day, Surely the Reformation presents something more than just the story of participants in a church struggle. The important fact is that here was a group of men deeply concerned about the religious and the moral life of a nation and of the world. Here was a group of men that dreamed their visions, and they saw their great objects of their dreams away off in the distance, that with great dedication they were sure they could reach, that this one great name was above every name, and that one little word would fell the enemy. We're not living in a time when we should be thinking of such as leaders that will lead the march in the struggle against Roman Catholicism or against the Jews or against the Greeks, but somehow or other to lead a struggle for God in a world that is increasingly behaving as if it believed that God is dead. Somehow or other we've got to come to that place where we can produce in sufficient numbers young men from our college graduates of today who will give us leadership in the church. Businessmen who, as they go about their work from day to day, are going to be concerned deeply about the moral fabric of this nation. There's a great person, Lillian Smith, who made the statement, "This is the sin of you and me." Now listen, this is good. This is the sin of you and me and all of us, that we have more power than law, more knowledge than understanding, more information about this earth than of the people who live upon it, more skill to fly to far-off places than to stop a moment to look on the secret spots of our own hearts. Freedom, she said, is a dreadful responsibility, and democracy will disappear from the face of the earth unless the hearts and souls and minds of men grow and mature. Any questions? What is the mark of such people? Let us think of that, because someplace along the line you and I are going to be challenged to become a part of this group of people that will help save a world. What are the characteristics? Well, as you look back on the reformers, and as you look back on those who did dream their dreams and they saw their visions, there were people who dared to stand by themselves and say, "Here stand I can do no other." It's been true of the scientific world. It's been true in religion. In the 1930s, we tried to throw out the term rugged individualism. We tried to throw it out because we had come to the place where we had associated this with a kind of capitalistic piracy. But it's a lot of nonsense to think of building a great nation or a great world or a great faith or great church without this term. What was Jeremiah but a rugged individual? What was Isaiah but a rugged individual? What have the great leaders of our faith been? What was St. Paul? What was Joseph? What was Jesus Christ but a rugged individual? People who every now and then were willing to stand up and be counted and say, "Here stand I can do no other." And it's been lacking in the church. It's been lacking in the pew, and it has been lacking in the pulpit. There's a great scarcity of strong pulpit men today. A great scarcity of those men who, when they speak, the nation listens. You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't think I ever thought they would. But I am prejudiced beyond debate in favor of my right to choose which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight. That's our privilege, isn't it, as Christians? Oh, we may not have an important place in the church. We may not have an important place in society. But before God, the stubborn ounces of my weight are going to be determined by my courage to stand up and be counted for it. The way out men have lived their lives like that because they'd a courage that came from the heart. That's the root of the word courage. Comes from the Latin word cor, meaning the heart. It was in Joseph when he went down into Egypt. It was in Daniel when he stood up against the dictator of his day. It was in Martin Luther when he said, "Here stand I can do no other." Then, too, these way-out men knew what they were looking for. They knew what they believed. This was the root of the dream of Joseph. It was the thing that kept him steady and true in the land of Pharaoh. Not only something in which he believed, but someone in whom he believed, and this someone was God. Every time when he was tempted, every time when something threatened to crush him, he fell back on this great belief of his. And he knew what it was. Thrilling how from the beginning of his ministry, Jesus radiated a faith in God. Radiated a faith not only in God, but in this kingdom that was going to come. And he believed that God was so much wrapped up, so much involved in this whole affair, that it was going to come to pass. Do you hear that? Jesus was so convinced that God was a part of this whole package that it was going to come to pass. It was faith. Strong, incredible, unbeatable faith that took this man to a cross and beyond. A conviction illustrated by that scene in Pilgrim's Progress where the pilgrim came to the hill of difficulty. And you remember he saw in front of him two lions. How in the world was he going to get by with his life? They were such vicious-looking creatures. And you remember a voice came to him and it said for him to move forward, for him to go on. What happened? When he came closer to the lions, you recall, he discovered that they were chained. And if he followed a certain narrow path, neither animal could reach him. It was this that Jesus taught, this that Jesus believed. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And all the lines of evil and temptation, these are chained and can never touch you, provided that you keep to this narrow way. And he was convinced of the power of it, and that somehow, somewhere, that in which he believed would be triumphant. Behold, the dreamer cometh. What would the church be without people that have been willing to dream with Christ his dream? There was a further characteristic of these way out men, and that is they were rebels. They were in rebellion, but they were in creative rebellion. If Joseph had just quietly resented what his brothers were doing, quietly resented the status quo, he never would have had to go down into Egypt. It was because he not only saw the dream, but he saw that something must be done about it. This led to the trouble. The mark of the creative rebel. Martin Luther said, "When I'm angry, I can pray well and I can preach well." Martin Luther was a creative rebel. Jesus said, "It has been said unto you of old time, but I say unto you." Jesus was a creative rebel. And Hugh Winston has pointed out, rebellion may take the form of a Lee Harvey Oswald, who pulled the trigger that snuffed out a life and brought shame on a people. Or it may take the form of a young Tom Dooley who peered into a microscope at a virus and triggered an antitoxin-loaded syringe into the bloodstream of a diseased Burmese in a streaming jungle halfway around the globe. Both these men were in rebellion. One against all authority and in denial of responsibility to his nation and his God. The other against suffering and pain and in keeping with his eternal sonship as a co-laborer with Jesus Christ. This is the kind of rebellion that Christians have got to feel in our time. There are so many areas where we just don't need what the poetic spirits talked about when they wanted those quiet people that will stand up against the evil of the world. But somehow or other to recall that the Protestant church was based on a group of people that protested angrily and protested determined. Little girl said to her mother, "Mother, I think I know how to blow a trumpet without making a sound." Well, probably that's been the problem with the church. Too many people who boil within and they never make a sound. To paraphrase Thoreau, and become a part of that group of folk who seem content to lead lives of quiet subordination. So the brethren looked on Joseph then and said, "Behold, this dreamer cometh." Eventually they had to go to him for help, though, didn't they? We just can't do without our dreamers. We just can't do without that group that's a way out. You remember that story, don't you, of the executives that were complaining about a certain vice president? And they went to the president and they said, every time we go into that man's office, he's doing nothing but look out the window. The president said, you find me another man that can look out a window as constructively as he can, and I'll hire him immediately. We need our dreamers. Bess Aldrich was right when she talked about that home away off in Nebraska that was being built. It had all the fixings. It had the hollyhock, and it had the blue larkspur, and it had the fence that was painted just the color that she had always dreamed about. And her husband said, you're quite a dreamer, Abby girl. And she replied, you have to dream. It keeps a kind of ideal before you. You see it first in your mind, and then you set about to try to make it the ideal working. If you want a garden, she said, well, I guess you got to dream a garden. If you want a garden, I guess you got to dream a garden. And if you want a kingdom of God, I guess you got to dream a kingdom of God. And there'll be those who'll laugh at us, and they'll jeer at us, and they'll mock us, and they'll call us dreamers, but we're still going to keep dreaming. And we of the Christian church can be called impractical and ask when we're going to realize that there's something realistic about the business of life, about doing business in this world in which Christ is very little part. But we're going to keep dreaming our dream. And we're going to keep believing that Jesus Christ knew what he was talking about. Because we believe that this world is at stake. God's world is at stake. And we're going to commit ourselves to the survival and the dignity of man. This isn't just the dream of Protestantism. It's the dream of millions beyond it. And we believe it will come true. Because we do believe it's God's dream. Amen.